Hello, everyone. So I am going to talk about this giant project that I started digging into not too long ago. And by not too long ago, I mean about 4 years. But first, I just wanted to thank the School of Information Science from SJSU for putting on this whole thing. They're awesome. Thanks for doing it. I hope there are many more. So I'm going to give you just a quick brief overview of the said project, just so to give you an understanding of kind of the issues that came up. Then I'll talk about some of the incredibly expected challenges and some of the unexpected challenges that came up along the way, and some tools that I use to start to overcome these challenges, and then some recommendations for tools that you might be able to use yourself. And just as a disclaimer, I am not incredibly used to talking about mental health to other people. I talk about it individually, I talk about it in small groups, I talk about it in like this little tiny little circle of people, but I had to challenge myself to be able to put it out to the world that other people are facing these problems, and then start to open up that dialogue and open up that discussion. So that's what I'm doing here. So first off, the project that I started was the Meaningful Impact Hub. It's basically an engine for change. It's helping people figure out what they want to do in life and helping libraries be kind of a lever for change and work with a workforce development and innovation ecosystem to create change. And this basically means helping people figure out what works for them individually. And that opened up a whole can of worms and made me navigate people and basically the world in a way that I wasn't used to before. So over time, I developed kind of this recipe for change. You may have heard of Ikigai. That's like a Japanese concept that's we have to root your life and the problems of the world to be able to find meaning and fulfillment. So I adapted kind of like the Ikigai thing to say, in order to find meaning and fulfillment, you have to be rooted in the world's problems, but not just the world's problems, the one that you care about personally. And then you have to be able to understand, are you going to do this through a nonprofit? Are you doing it through a business? Are you doing it through an interest group? Are you doing it through advocacy, policy work? What is the pathway that you can use to take action? And then how is change already currently being made? I talk a lot about technology and innovation in my everyday job. I'm the technology innovation librarian, so that kind of makes sense. But technology means nothing if it's not rooted into a real problem in the world. Otherwise, like AI is cool, but if it's not solving a problem, then it's just not like why? And then the people who care are the ecosystems of organizations and individuals that help people navigate through these other spaces. In order to understand the world's problems, you have a whole ton of organizations that are raising awareness about what these issues are. And then you have a whole bunch of organizations that are trying to promote the existing pathways and what you can actually do about it. And then you have like a whole bunch of organizations that are dedicated to creating change, whether that's through technology, advocacy, policy, however you're going to do it. And helping people work through this process is challenging. So one of the first things, and probably the most obvious that I ran into, is you may have seen this infographic before, the Sustainable Development Goals. The first thing that I found out is that not only are people helping to solve these problems, but the reason they're helping is because they were living on the wrong side of these problems. And I won't go into too much detail of it, but like I grew up in poverty. I grew up in a semi actually my school wasn't too terrible. I can't blame the school. But like my home life was not incredible, and I had to overcome a lot of challenges just to be able to get where I am today. So it's uncovering those stories that made me want to do this project and the things that I had to face from my past to be able to get to a better future. It sounds cliche, but it's true. Like, I stopped caring about cheesiness a really long time ago, otherwise I wouldn't get anywhere. So it's helping people navigate and understand the world's problems to look at it in a different way. And so the first and most obvious was probably imposter syndrome. I kept telling myself that I grew up in the short end of a lot of these problems. What makes me qualified to help people figure out what they should do in life? If it was challenging enough for me to actually answer that question for myself. And I kept telling, like, I had this horrible narrative for myself and just kept telling myself I couldn't do it, couldn't do it. And for too long, I let that hold me back. But so some of the tools were, I finally just admitted that I have imposter syndrome. And that's like, at first, I want to give a shout out to Brian Pitchman. He's from the Evolve Project, and he's one of the biggest supporters, like one of the people that helped me through this project. And he was, I think he actually was the first person that I sent this incredibly pathetic sounding email, just like I was losing my mind, for lack of a better term. And he helped a lot. So shout out to Brian Pitchman, and I'll put a link to Evolve Project in the chat just because I can. He's awesome. And after that, I didn't bug Brian about this one, but I started writing out a list of all the horrible things that I tell myself. And I started kind of like jotting down and starting to challenge where these thoughts came from and how I can shift them and reframe them in a more positive light. And that's, I don't know any of you. I'm not going to tell you what any of that stuff was, but just know that I did it. It's out there. It's a thing. I recommend it. So and this took a really long time. I'm still doing it. So if you face a lot of imposter syndrome and you have that internal narrative that just says, you suck, you're fat, you can't do this, whatever, just know that it's not going to change right away. You need to make that shift over time. And funny enough, I used to make fun of people that watched a lot of motivational videos. And I will admit that some of them are cheesier and more terrible than others, but some of them are actually really good. Some of them help me kind of lift up, get through, and reframe the way I thought about myself and the way I thought about my projects and my approach to all this. So I also put in a link to the American Psychological Association that has some additional techniques, like some of them that I wish that I had known from the beginning, some of them that actually mirror some of the stuff that I started to do naturally. And so it's a helpful link to do. So the second challenge was that you have all these people that are facing all these challenges, and now you're helping people to dig through their own personal history and figure out what they care about most and find a pathway to help. Just like I faced all those different challenges from my past, the people that I'm helping are also facing the challenges that they face in their past. And that's when I found out that hurt people hurt people. It's something that I wish I had known a long time ago, because I used to be one of those hurt people that hurt people. And in hindsight, I'm not proud of it, but it's something that's human, it's natural. It's when you're facing pain in your personal history or your personal life, sometimes you accidentally take it out on others. So I actually had to learn to face it with empathy. I had to seek to understand instead of just saying, nope, get out of my life, because that's how people change. It's by looking at people and saying, yeah, you hurt me, but I understand why. I understand what drove you from your past that made you strike out in some way. Not always in a physical way, a lot of times it's in an emotional way, but it's it's not being reactionary. And that's why I love this quote. The true mark of maturity is when somebody hurts you and you try to understand their situation instead of trying to hurt them back. And that took me way too long to understand because I grew up around other people that were in the same situation and I never knew what to do about it. I had some inkling that I shouldn't take it personally, that that's not something that they're doing against me personally. It's their own pain that's coming out in different ways. But with time comes maturity. So cool. So, oh, this is out of order, but whatever. So these are some of the tools that I use to overcome that hurt. And it took a really, really, really long time to learn not to be reactionary, to not just say nope. And I also discovered that I had to bracket out different levels of caring because the people that I work with in the library and just the people that I work with on an everyday basis in a workshop, it sounds horrible, but I empathize with them, but I don't care about them, if that makes sense. I had to differentiate that in my mind to say, I work with all these people that are facing all these challenges. They're trying to figure out how they can support affordable housing because they lived in a world where they weren't able to make ends meet. And not being able to make ends meet made it so that they didn't, some of them didn't even want to keep on going anymore. Some of them were lashing out at people. Some of them were, they didn't see a path forward, so they struck out in different ways. And I empathized, I understood, but I couldn't care. There's only a certain little inner circle group of people that I really care about. Because when you care about someone, you let them in and they can hurt you. That's probably why love is so challenging. It's probably why that's so difficult to actually do. But that's a whole other can of worms. I'll just skip to the next part. And so I just had to make that differentiation to know that, yeah, they may have done something that hurt. One example is that I'm part of a group called Words for Healing. It's basically people that get together and share different stories along the path to healing. And every so often we get people that go into that group that share a story before they're ready, or they share something that's more personal than they had planned, or they share something that they weren't actually ready to face. And then they start lashing out at other people in the group, or they just disappear. We've had people that showed up at that group and then I would run into them at an event years, like sometimes years later or months later, and they would say, yeah, in hindsight, I was kind of a douchebag. And I never came back because I was too embarrassed about what I had done. And more often than not, now I just say, that's life. That's how it works. That's part of being human. That group, they exist to let people back after they screwed up. If that person is on that path to healing and on that path to changing themselves, part of what we can do as a library and part of what we can do as like a support organization is to say, you done screwed up. You can come back, but as long as you try to make amends in some way, say, I screwed up, but I'm changing. I screwed up because I'm changing. I screwed up because I'm healing and I'm facing things that I don't know how to process and I don't know how to deal with. and I haven't built that toolbox yet. So I hurt. And now I'm trying to deal with that in a different way, a better way. So that's part of what we can do as a library. Empathize, but don't put too much into caring unless it's in your inner circle, and accept that not everyone's going to come back. Not everyone is going to be able to break that cycle in a timely manner. Breaking old cycles is really friggin' hard. But the understanding and acceptance of other people is what helps support that change. It's what I had, it's what helped me create that change, and now I help do it for others. So, and I put down at the bottom a link to how to break the cycle of abuse. It's one example of many different cycles that people are trying to change, but that article can help you build empathy and help you understand what people are actually facing. And I put in another link later on for another resource that is basically like a short form video that gives you a better idea of what people are actually facing when they're going through the healing process. So when people strike out at you, you know why, and that you can have a better understanding and be able to react better. Because if you're doing the work for change, that's something that you have to be able to do. If you want to do social impact work, or if you want to be able to do change work, if you're a social worker, this is par for the course. Some of you might be social workers or have been social workers. Some of you might already do this and know this. And if you do, feel free to share some tools that work for you. I'm always looking for stuff. So the third challenge that I ran into was and this is how this was out of order. When I had to put together, I basically listened to people's stories. I help people to uncover the stories that matter most to them and shape them in a way that helps them uncover what motivates them to do whatever they want to do in life. And then I help them connect over to those real world problems and the pathways, and like help them build the skills necessary to take action. Because all these problems in here, they're overwhelming. They're complex. They can bring you to your knees if you don't have any solid pathway to help. It's why we all get so depressed and downtrodden whenever we're trying to read like all the headlines in the news. It's why we have to go on news detoxes so we don't have to take in any more of this stuff. And part of what I do is I collect the stories from individuals and organizations that show how change is possible. And one thing that I will skip over to, just because it's an awesome resource, is the Stand Together Foundation. One of the ways that I learned how to kind of format my stories is because this Stand Together Foundation, part of what they do is collect those stories for change. They show how change is happening so that people can actually stand up and make a difference. Because otherwise, you crumble. You can't just raise awareness of a problem because it doesn't really get you very far. It just makes you depressed. And so this is kind of what helped me a lot in being able to pave that way. And I'm going to jump back over here. So part of what I had to learn is I thought that I was like really good at being able to listen to and process other people's stories, but I was wrong. Like I was incredibly wrong, and I realized that my communication skills were not incredibly good. I didn't know how to be an active listener, and I didn't know how to let people share their stories productively. So you've probably heard in a lot of these other sessions already is that good communication is key. It's key in like human relationships, it's key in romantic relationships, it's key in building partnerships. It's a whole big thing. So I had to go through and be able to learn how to listen to and shape stories through the lens of healing and through the lens of figuring out your path. So one of the resources that helped me was from NAMI, which I wish I could remember what that acronym stood for right now, but I just really can't. Click on it, you'll find out. And it's basically 6 ways you can help a loved one with their healing journey. The recommendations in there are for the people that you care about. It's for the people that are in your inner circle and the people that you're actively willing to let them screw up over and over and over again until they get where they want to go. But the recommendations in there are not necessarily the same ones that you would use in a public environment. It's not the same ones that you might use in the library or with people that you don't necessarily know that well. So, but you can adapt them and be able to find out the limits of what you are able to do as a librarian in a public or academic sphere to be able to get through that. And another thing that I had to figure out, and that took a really, really long time to figure out, is that I just don't like everyone. And I don't have to. I can help people, but I don't have to like them. And I just learned to be okay with that. I've talked to a lot of teachers and educators that have learned that lesson the same way, but I'm okay with that. And I also put in a link to trauma-informed adult education down here because that's basically how we're looking through the lens through which we're looking at the world and helping to build that understanding by shifting the way, like our techniques. So, and I won't go over like all those different techniques. It's way better to actually just read the resource because it's pretty awesome. And the last challenge that I ran into was I had to learn how to effectively support others while also putting myself first, which was a challenge because I don't always. One of the ways that I used to work through my old challenges was to put everyone else first and find my self-worth in being able to solve the problems of others. And I just didn't pay attention to my own. I shoved them over to the side and said, I'm doing okay because I'm helping people. And that didn't serve me. So I had to make that shift over to be able to recognize when I'm facing burnout and be able to know what to do in reaction. So sometimes I just take weekends where I don't do anything. I get red velvet cupcakes and candles and I just take time for myself. And I don't do any work. I don't do anything except that. I might watch movies, eat cupcakes, and just do fun things. And I also had to accept that while individual change does take time, breaking those cycles takes time, change within an organization or a community takes a really, really, really freaking long time. And I had to change the metrics that I measured success because I couldn't say that I will only be successful when change has been completed, when a new process has been put into place, or when behaviors have changed, or when people are treating others better. I had to be able to say incremental change is also a win. And I had to be able to step back and recognize when that incremental change was happening because I was trying to hold myself to too high of a standard and hold change to too high of a standard. And I didn't recognize the little steps that showed that progress was being made, and I didn't acknowledge them. And that probably slowed me down. So I had to learn how to recognize and celebrate those little wins and say that that is indeed a win. And then I also had to, I put this one last because you've probably already heard about work-life balance ad nauseum. I'm pretty sure that's just something that most people face, but I just put that in there just because it's a whole big thing. And now I'll jump over to this last little section because I want to highlight some of the different things that were incredibly helpful for me. So one thing you may have noticed a trend is that I deal a lot with trying to figure out human relationships and how to communicate and how to, I'll admit it, I'm trying to figure out the whole love thing too. I'll get there. Don't worry about it. But one of the things that actually helped me most was this is an insanely long podcast, but it's a Simon Sinek podcast where he basically just talks about how he screwed up in relationships and how he kind of learned how to communicate better. And this is one of the rare podcasts that both Simon Sinek, the interviewee, and the interviewer also had like really good insights into how that all worked. And I wouldn't put too much stock in like the title of like the loneliness, love, and dating because they do talk a lot about that. But it's also like a whole lot more just about how to communicate with friends and how to be able to. He talks a lot about just being able to sit in the mud with people and not necessarily be able to give guidance, but just how to be and support. So this was an awesome one, even if I think it's like almost 2 hours long, but I watched the whole thing. Maybe you will too. And this is that video that I referenced that said it's about building empathy about what people are going through when they're healing. I did a lot of this myself. I don't talk about it a lot. I'm not gonna. I don't know any of you. But this is a really good video to be able to understand what people are going through and understand why they do the things they do. 9 uncomfortable signs you're healing emotionally. It is a animated video. Don't hold it against it. It has really good information. And I already talked about this one. I can skip over it. Adam Grant, he talks a lot about changing habits, changing mindsets, and he gives a really awesome set of curated books. So this is a really good thing for libraries. Oh, this is a really good thing for libraries to dig into because I read a lot of the books that he recommended, and he has also written some books, and he also has a podcast where he interviews some really cool people that are doing cool things and change. And this Doing the Work Frontline Stories of Social Change is also a really awesome one to be able to figure out what that change looks like and how to navigate it and figure it out. And this is a mental health series, so that's why I put that last one in there. So I'm about to wrap up, but are there any questions out there? You can also message me.
It looks like one common question in the chat is when/where will these resources be shared out?
What I can do is I'll stop the share here and I'll just put it in the chat. Share. Anyone with link can view. Copy. And link to slides. There. Just Google Slides. And yes, I do highly recommend that people take a red velvet cupcake day. It works wonders.
All right, it looks like we don't have many questions, so I will go ahead and end the recording. And